Archivemind.sylx-112 had not been a fortress. It had been a monastery, not to the Emperor to memory itself, and now it was. Remembering them, the Astartes carried imprints of every battle, every death, every victory coded into flesh, bone, gene seed, and the planet had begun to respond, not in violence, but in recognition. Rayleigh stood on the parapet as dawn cycle broke. The wind tasted like sage, a scent that made no sense here. He remembered it now, a meal in a hall that never existed. His father no such man-breaking bread. The bread was bitter, the room warm. He could feel the dream approaching, not sleep, dream, and he did not resist. Because sometimes remembrance is the invasion, and sometimes it's the only way a world asks not to be forgotten. The descent took 7 hours. The shaft was unmarked on any schematic. No garrison personnel remembered its existence. And yet, it was cut cleanly into the bedrock. Spiral carved by machine precision, the Mechanicus hadn't used since the Great Crusade. No lighting, no rails. Just a narrow path etched into stone, winding downward with silent insistence. Rayleigh's lead, bolter sheathed, Uspecs muted. Each Marine followed without word. Not out of protocol, but instinct. The air grew cooler with depth, but never stale. It held scent. Wax, faintly burned. Myrrh, sharp and sweet. And something older stone warmed by breath that hadn't been exhaled in millennia. They reached the threshold at cycle's end. The passage opening into a vault, not shaped by worship, but memory. The chapel waited, not ruined, not preserved, held. Its architecture was impossible to date, imperial in silhouette, but stripped of ornament. No Aquila, no martyr statues, no iconography, just smooth, weight-bearing pillars shaped like standing figures with erased faces. The altar sat in the center, not the head. Circular, cracked, worn down, not by damage but use. A depression cupped the middle, as if something had rested there for generations and been lifted only once. No blood, no relic, just dust. But the dust did not move. Rayleigh stepped forward. His footfalls echoed. The sound returned too slowly, stretching like time bent around grief. The air trembled, not with presence, but with weight. Candles lined the walls, dozens, maybe hundreds, each set into alcoves, each burning. No heat, no fuel, no flicker, just steady flame, unmoving, as if reality here allowed no wind, no entropy. Sarth approached one and extended a gauntlet. The flame bent toward him, not away. A world that lights its own votives, he murmured, but to whom? Vexo scanned. No power sources, no heat trace, no chemical residue. The candles weren't producing light. They were remembering it, echoing photons that had burned here long ago, recasting the same memory through infinite repetition. Photonic stasis, he whispered, faith encoded in physics. Rayleigh moved to the altar. He didn't touch it, just stared. He felt nothing divine, nothing infernal, only pressure, a gravity of attention. Something had stood here once, and its absence had never been forgiven. On the far wall, a fresco, faded, near invisible, rendered in charcoal instead of pigment. It showed not a saint, but a shape tall, robed, faceless, arms open, not in blessing, but in invitation. Beneath it, the words in broken old Gothic, "Remember us, even if you forget our names." Rayleigh stepped closer. The phrase resonated, not in meaning, in rhythm. It matched the cadence of the child's voice from the ghost vox. Sarth ran his hand along the wall beneath the fresco. Stone flaked away. Beneath the surface, another layer. Dozens of handprints, small, large, worn down to smudges, pressed into the stone like oaths. They didn't pray for salvation, he said. They prayed to be remembered. Kurov entered behind them. his expression unreadable beneath his helm. He walked directly to the altar and stood there, motionless. "I've seen this place before," he said. "Rael is turned. In a dream." Karav shook his head. "In a memory, but not mine." They examined the walls again. Behind each candle alcove, another inscription etched in languages not indexed, not heretical, just forgotten. Scripts that predated conquest, predating even the Lectitio Divinitatis. Rayleigh began to understand. This was a shrine not built for gods. It was built before them, a place of liturgy that preceded doctrine, not heresy, not blasphemy, just sequence. A rhythm of belief divorced from identity, a structure where memory was the sacrament. They found no bones, no ashes, but they found robes, folded in silence, stacked on shelves with infinite care. Some were child-size, some ancient, all untouched by decay. Each held a symbol at the collar, an open circle, empty at the center. Absence made sacred. They left the chapel in silence. No orders, no rites, no cataloging. Rayleigh gave no command. Vexos filed no report. Sarth did not recite, because there are places in the galaxy where silence is the only acceptable response. And there are sanctuaries that ask for no belief, only that someone remembered they were once believed in. They found her near the orchard that didn't feed. It was Halgren who saw her first. He'd been charting the perimeter near the southern grove, where fruit still clung to branches that refused to rot, where leaves shimmered to green for a world so close to judgment. The Auspex registered nothing. No heat signature, no motion trace. Yet when he turned, she was standing there, not hidden, not afraid, just waiting. Small frame, no older than 7th standard, pale skin marked by wind, not illness, dark hair clinging to her scalp in uneven braids. Strands knotted in ways that mirrored devotional wraps used by preministorum cultures. She wore no shoes. Her robe looked hand-woven, mismatched in stitch but deliberate. Every thread held intention. She didn't run when Halgren approached, didn't cry. She tilted her head slightly, and then she sang. No language, no lyrics, just sound. Tones rising and falling like a song learned in the womb. Notes that didn't seek understanding, only familiarity. Halgren stopped in his tracks. He did not raise his weapon. "Captain," he voxed, "you need to see this." Rayleigh arrived within minutes. Flanked by Sarth and Vexos, the child was still singing. Rayleigh stepped forward. "Who are you?" She didn't answer. Vexos scanned. Biologically normal. Human. No mutations. No augmetic. No markers of psyker strain. No gene seed contamination. Just a girl. Blood type standard. Respiratory function healthy. Protein assimilation intact. "She shouldn't be here," Vexos murmured. "She shouldn't be anywhere." "No records?" Rayleigh asked. "None." They brought her to the fortress. She followed without resistance, barefoot on the stone roads that hadn't felt childhood in centuries. The garrison watched in silence as she passed. Some lowered their heads, others turned away, not in shame. In memory, Arel stared at her the longest. "I remember her," he said, voice dry, "but I don't know from where." The child did not speak, not once, but she sang, always, even in sleep cycle. The melody changed, but never ceased. It echoed through the fortress like incense, curling around corridors, slipping through Vox units, even when powered down. It interfered with nothing. It replaced nothing. It added. One night Sorth found himself humming along. He hadn't learned the tune. It had simply arrived, in his throat, as if his lungs had remembered a thing his brain had not. He approached the girl, knelt not as priest, but as listener. "Is this yours?" he asked. "Or ours?" She placed her hand on his helm, and kept singing. Rayleigh's authorized containment not as prisoner, but as anchor. The girl was given quarters in the upper keep. furnished with old materials. Not one item malfunctioned in her presence. Cogitators held charge longer, lights dimmed, softer, air recycled more cleanly, as if the world adjusted to accommodate her. She ate protein paste without complaint, slept in silence, never showed fear, never showed joy, just presence. Vexos theorized harmonic transference and effect, where neural patterns manifest through auditory emission. She isn't projecting power, he said. She's remembering it into place. When they brought her near the chapel, the candles flared, only for a moment. But every flame bowed. Rayleigh asked her again, "Who are you?" She looked at him, eyes full, not innocent. "Ancient Dot." She opened her mouth and sang. This time, the melody was different. Lower, slower. It matched the cadence of the ghost vox. Matched the rhythm etched into the chapel wall. Sarth confirmed it. The hymn was the same. Dot, a song that predated names. They cross-referenced frequency patterns, found an echo inside the soil. The rhythm of her voice matched tectonic pulses deep beneath the planet's crust. Not chaos, not anomaly. Synchronization. "She is not possessed," Sarth said. "She is remembered." Vexos looked up from his instruments. "Or she is the memory." No one responded. The child stood beside the altar again that evening. Candles bowed. The fresco wept ashnot metaphor. The charcoal lines beneath the wall flaked slowly. Not from decay, from exposure. A new layer revealed itself. Under the old drawing. A family. Rough sketches. A woman. A man. 2 children. One unmistakably her. Holding hands. Smiling. Beneath it, in a dialect older than Low Gothic. "This is how we stayed. Not escaped. Not endured. Stayed." The girl stood silent now. The song faded. She pointed to the image. Rayleigh understood. The planet had not lost its people. It become them. And now it was singing itself back into being, one note at a time. The first sign was small. A delay in report. Times. Rayleigh filed his midday log. 12 minutes late and characteristic, but not alarming. Vexos flagged it anyway. Protocol. The captain, after all, was the constant. While others questioned, Rayleigh remained. He knew the codex like breath, knew the sequence of war, of rest, of escalation. But Silex 112 did not escalate. It did not demand. It absorbed. On the 3rd day after the child began singing, Rayleigh paused mid-briefing. His words trailed not into silence, but into something else. Soft syllables, in an old dialect of High Gothic, the kind spoken before the rise of the Ministorum. He didn't notice. When Sorth prompted him, he blinked once and resumed. The shift went unacknowledged. Vexos cross-referenced audio logs. The tonal inflection of Rayleigh's voice had altered by 7% over 2 cycles. The shift wasn't degradation. It was return. Like his throat had remembered another rhythm. By cycle 6, he no longer used his full name in transmissions. Rayleigh became I, then became we. Not in the manner of command, plural, but as if identity itself had expanded without permission. When asked to clarify an order, he looked at Hallgren and said, "You know the pattern." There was no pattern. Rayleigh began walking the fortress at night, alone, without helm, without vox. He would stop at the walls and run his fingers along the stone, tracing marks only he seemed to see. He paused before doorways and tilted his head, as if listening for knocks that never came. He slept, not in sarcophagus, not in field bed, on stone, in the chapel, with the candles that didn't burn. And he dreamed not fragments, lives. He awoke once, whispering a woman's name, Illyra. It meant nothing, no record, no past. But when Vexos reviewed his biometric log, his heart rate had stabilized, his neural patterns calmed. No indicators of stress. The captain was at peace, which was wrong, because Rayleigh did not do peace. He had stood beneath the dying stars of Keller's Gate, had ordered orbital fire on his own position when the trench line failed, had watched 3 companies dissolve beneath plague rain on Veridin Ikes, and never flinched. He was resolve made flesh, and now he forgot the litanies, forgot the order of armoring, forgot his own serial number during gene seed affirmation. When prompted, he simply said, "That's not who I am anymore." Sarth confronted him, not as challenge, as plea. "You are Captain of the Iron Sea. You were chosen." Rayleigh looked up from the chapel floor. He had been carving symbols into the stone not with blade, but with finger. The grooves bled, not from flesh, from stone. "I was chosen," he said, "but not only once." The symbols matched the ones behind the child as if Riska not copied. Rakajidni's dreams had grown long, deep. He spoke of siblings never known, of rooms made of brass wood and pale cloth. He described them in detail, the color of light through their curtains, the ache in his bones before rain that had never fallen on any war-torn field. He remembered dying, not in battle, in bed, surrounded by voices humming a song with no melody. He spoke of it plainly, without fear. "This isn't forgetting," he said. "It's replacing." The others grew cautious. Halgren stopped removing his helm. Vareth ceased, sleeping entirely, cycling combat priming rituals through the night. Vexos considered medical stasis, but Rayleigh resisted nothing. He sat with the girl in silence, walked the fortress like a man returning home after exile. He stopped calling the squad by rank. He called them by names they didn't recognize. "Have you seen Merrick?" he asked once. No such Marine had ever served with them. On the 8th cycle, he restructured the patrol route not tactically, but seen. He had the squad march through the orchard at dusk. Sighting the light helps us remember. Vexos issued a quiet escalation code to orbit. No response. The void had gone still. They were alone, and Rayleigh did not care. Sarth held council in the chapel. Rayleigh stood before them, unarmed, unarmored, wrapped in a robe of civilian weave taken from the old vault. He looked smaller, not weak. "Human, you are dissolving," Sarth said. Rayleigh smiled. "No, I'm being rewritten, and I accept the new draft." No one moved, because he didn't command them. 2, because part of them wanted to listen, wanted to follow. Vareth stepped forward. "What do we do when the captain forgets who he is?" Rayleigh reached out, touched his shoulder. "Then you remember for me." That night, the candles burned higher. The child sang louder. The chapel walls grew warmer, and Rayleigh stopped using his name. The signal cut without error. No distortion. No flaran, no decay. One moment, the Vox channel hummed with idle returns from orbit status pings, atmospheric metrics, medical sync. The next, there was nothing, not static, not silence, just absence. It wasn't failure. It wasn't sabotaged. It was decision. Vexo has confirmed the diagnostics 3 times. All systems functional. No interference. Antenna structures aligned. Satellite sweep clean. Yet the connection remained void. The ship in orbit pinged once, then ceased. No fallback. No emergency override. Just a single message. Timestamped at 2:03 local. Await instruction. Rayleigh if that name still meant anything, showed no concern. "It's quiet," he said, standing atop the outer ridge. It was always going to be quiet. The squad fanned out into the eastern lowlands. No roads led here. No ruins marked the path. The terrain sloped downward into a basin where trees grew in unnaturally straight lines, their branches never overlapping, their leaves never falling. The deeper they walked, the less they heard. Bootsteps dulled, armored joints muffled. Wind died. Even their own breath sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. Sarth attempted a hymn, voice low, measured. The words formed. His lips moved, but no sound followed. Not muted, denied. The sound was there. It just wasn't allowed. VexOS recorded a test phrase and played it back. The waveform showed peaks. Vibrations existed, but their ears picked up nothing. Helm systems read amplitude. Auditory nerves registered none. The silence wasn't natural. It wasn't imposed. It was a condition of place. Rayleigh walked at the front. He didn't issue orders. He simply moved, and they followed. The trees gave way to stone black, flat, as if poured across the valley floor. No plant life here. No insects. No moisture. A perfect circle, 70 meters wide, etched into the landscape without tool or blast. And in the center, a single plinth. Not a monument. Not a beacon. Just a smooth pillar of unknown alloy, 1 meter tall, wrapped in veins of oxidized silver. No inscriptions. No glow. Just presence. Rayleigh approached first. The silence deepened. Sarth's vision flickered. Not his helm display his sight. Shadows shifted without movement. His perception lagged behind his gaze. The world was slowing. Halgren stumbled, hands to his ears. There's no sound, he voxed. But no one heard him. The vox black expanded, not his field. As understanding. VexOS ran a biosweep. His own heart rate had slowed. His blood oxygen levels increased. Time dilation, not induced, chosen. Rayleigh placed his palm on the plinth. The silence changed. No sound returned. But something else did. Emotion, pure, unfiltered. Not thought, not speech. Just the echo of presence. Loss, not pain. Not fear. Departure. This place was not built to trap. It was built to mourn. A planetary heart sealed not by grief, but by restraint. It remembered everything that had been said. Every word, every vow, every scream, and withheld them, not to erase. To preserve. Sound here would not echo, because echo could distort. The truth must remain whole. Verith fell to his knees. Tears, impossible tears, streamed down his cheeks. She said it would return. He tried to say. No sound, just the motion of lips. The girl stood at the edge of the stone. She had followed them. None had seen her arrive. She didn't walk. She was there. She raised her hands and sang. No one heard it, but they felt it. A low resonance behind the lungs. A pressure in the blood. Notes that lived not in air, but in memory. The kind of song that had no beginning, no crescendo, only echo. The plinth responded, not with light, not with movement. It listened, and for a moment, the black lifted not, from the vox, from the heart. Rayleigh looked back at his men. His eyes were wet, not with despair, with knowing. He stepped off the plinth, turned, spoke. They heard nothing, but they understood everything. Because on Silex 112, words no longer mattered. Only what remained after words were gone. The statue wasn't there before. Not in maps. Not in memory. Not in any of the picked captures Vexos had taken during the initial survey. And yet it stood now at the edge of the southern cliffs, where the orchard's edge met the fall off into white mist and shale. 40 meters tall, humanoid, kneeling, arms outstretched. Not in triumph. In offering, it faced the fortress. Rayleigh was the first to see it, at dawn cycle, while the others still calibrated gear they no longer needed. He stood at the outer wall and simply said, "There." The squad assembled. They did not draw weapons, but none removed their helms. It wasn't the size that unsettled them. It was the detail. Armor, carved in the precise pattern of the iron cincture-trimmed pauldrons. Reinforced vambrace plating, the left greave reinforced at the same seam as Halgren's own. But this was no effigy. It was not generic. It wasn't artistic. It was accurate, too accurate. The face was bare, and it was Rayleigh's, not idealized, not stylized. Just him, eyes closed, lips parted, not in prayer, not in command, but in a strange kind of stillness. like he was listening to something buried inside the world. Vexos approached first. Auspexes activated. The structure emitted no heat, no energy, no psychic bleed. The material registered as stone, but it pulsed. A slow, rhythmic thrum beneath the surface. A heartbeat dot. When Vexos placed his gauntlet to the chest, the statue grew warm. Not from temperature change, from recognition, and then it bled. A single rivulet of crimson welled from the seam at its collarbone, ran down the torso. Vexos caught it on a collection swab, sealed it, ran analysis. Human, he said. After seconds, he recalibrated, double-checked, confirmed. Genetically, identical to Rayleigh's. Halgren swore beneath his breath. Karov stepped back. The girls stood behind them now, silent, watching. Rayleigh's didn't speak. Sarth moved beside him. What is this? Rayleigh's stared up at his own face. Not a warning, he said. A memory. The bleeding didn't stop. It didn't pour. It persisted. A steady line, like ink from a quill dragging through history. Vexos took more samples. The blood was living. Cellular activity present. Not decayed, not synthetic. He tested it against every Marine, and found fragments matching all of them. This is not a copy, he said. It's an echo, a recombination of us. As if the planet took every trace we've left: hair, skin oil, breath, blood, and rewrote it into structure. Sarth looked toward the girl. She didn't build this, he said, but it responds to her. She stepped forward. The statue shuddered, not visibly, but the pulsing grew stronger. The blood darkened, thickened. The Israelis's eyes opened. No iris, no white, just black. Not void black, not war black. The color of depth. Then it closed them again. No voice, no gesture, just that moment. And it was enough. The Marines stepped back, not in fear, in reverence. Because what stood before them was not idol, not sentinel. It was remembrance, sculpted into form, matter reorganized to hold a thought. Kurov placed his hand on the left thigh of the statue. The armor sculpted there matched the scratch he'd taken 3 years prior, an orc cleaver that hadn't breached the plate but left a distinctive gouge. It was there, perfect, impossible. He turned to Rayleigh's. You didn't build this. Rayleigh shook his head slowly. I dreamed it. The others froze. I saw it last night, Rayleigh said. But it wasn't stone. It was me. And I wasn't kneeling. I was listening. Sarth's hand tightened on his Crozius. To what? Rayleigh's looked to the horizon. To the world. Remembering itself, Vexos stepped away. This is biological violation. It defies regulation, denies codex sanctity, ignores material law. It's not violation, Rayleigh's interrupted. It's invitation. The wind rose. The statue's surface trembled, not cracking, not failing, breathing. K. Rev stepped forward, touched the shoulder. His own memories surged and bitten. Childhood that never happened. A home with no coordinates. Parents he never had, laughing in a tongue he didn't know. He staggered back. They're not visions, he gasped. They're mine. The statue had given him something, or returned it. Sarth spoke again. Then the question is not how it was made. He turned to the girl. It's why she raised her hand, pointed behind them. Another statue, smaller, half buried in the dirt, already worn with time. A child, arms out, waiting, Curve whispered. It remembers her too. Rayleigh stood before the monument. His own face stared down at him. If this world remembers us, he said, voice slow, then who sculpted it? No one answered. Because the answer was already around them, and it was still sculpting. It was time. By every measure, by every protocol, by every code etched into the marrow of their training, the verdict had ripened. Silex 112 was unsustainable, not through war or loss, but through anomaly. It did not resist the Imperium. It unwrote it. No compliance. No heresy. Just something else, a memory that persisted so powerfully it began to replace. The Codex Astartes allows no space for sentiment. When a world fails to maintain the doctrinal structure of imperial order, it is marked. Cleanse, withdraw, record, forget. The chain is absolute. Rayleigh stood before the transmission altar. The chapel around him dimmed to pre-dawn gray. The child was gonna vanish without footfall, without trace. The statues remained. The fortress walls still hummed with faint, wordless song, but the planet had gone still. Not quiet. Still, as if it waited not for judgment, but for acknowledgement. Vexos had prepared the codes. Orbital positioning was optimal. The cruiser's payloads cyclonic sealed, sanctified stood ready. The keystrokes required less than 4 seconds. Silex 112 would burn beneath sanctified fire. The memory field vitrified into silence. Rayleigh's didn't move. Sarth stood beside him. "Captain," he said, "you must act." The console waited, blinking, not impatient, just consistent. "Protocol mandates eradication," Vexos said. "There is no allowance for integration, no clause for preservation." Rayleigh said nothing, because something inside him had cracked not with pain, but with pause. He remembered standing on Veridin Ix, issuing the order that turned its final continent into dust. He remembered the shrieking skies, the collapse of oceans into flame, the silence that followed. That silence had been clean, clarifying. This silence was different. He looked out over the ridge, where the first statue still knelt, blood now dried along its chest, dark and permanent. The wind had etched lines across its surface patterns, phrases, glimpses of something between script and breath. The Codex had never warned him of this. Kurov approached from the western wall. His voice was soft. "She came back last night." Rayleigh's turned. "The child?" Kurov nodded. "She stood by my bunk. Didn't speak. Just stood there, watching. When I opened my eyes, she wasn't there. But the floor beneath her was warm." Halgren entered next. He carried his helmet under one arm, brow lined with something unspoken. "I dreamed of the drop," he said. "Our drop onto this world. You were awake during the descent," Vexos said. "I dreamed of it anyway," Halgren replied. "Only we weren't descending. We were being remembered." Sarth frowned. "That's not faith. That's infection." "No," Halgren said. "It felt like forgiveness." Rayleigh's returned to the console. His hand hovered above the input. The code sat ready. Alpha purge, signature lock, voice verify. He had only to speak, but he didn't know what to say. Not because he feared judgment, because he feared accuracy. To name this world damned would be easy, but it was not damned. It was remembering. Vexos stepped forward, hands raised in formal posture. "Captain, protocol is not burden. It is liberation. We obey so that we do not decide." Rayleigh's looked at him, slowly. "And if the Codex is not enough?" Vexos flinched. Not from insult. From the implication. Sarth straightened. "The Codex is sufficient. Then why haven't I spoken the words?" Rayleigh's asked. The silence answered. Because every rule they had followed, every sequence they had obeyed, had not accounted for this. A planet that did not resist. A child that sang reality into coherence. Statues that bled truth. A silence that offered peace instead of threat. Rayleigh stepped away from the console. "No order," he said. The room froze. Vexos moved first. "Captain, you are in breach." "I am in hesitation," Rayleigh's replied. "That is not breach. That is thought." Kurov stepped between them. "Then let us wait." Vexos turned to him, stunned. "You agree with this violation?" "I agree with the pause," Kurov said. Sarth looked at them all, then stepped back. "We cannot linger. The Codex is clear." Rayleigh's faced him. Then you give the order. Sirth's mouth opened, closed, and remained silent, because none of them could do it. Not because they had turned traitor, not because they were weak, because the world had offered something they had never been taught to survive. Recognition without resistance. The child was not in the chapel, but her song returned low, across the stone. No source, no sound, just resonance. Rayleigh sat at the altar, his hands open. No voice came, no light descended, but something shifted in the air. The codex did not tear, but it bent. She emerged just after dusk, walking through the tree line where the orchard met the stone fields. The air had been too still for 2 hours. No birds, no wind, no sound from the chapel, not even the girl's song. The sky had paled to that washed slate color that never quite became night on Silex 112. Then the branches parted, and she stepped through, alone, unarmed, not young, not old. She wore no insignia, no armor, no weapon. Her robe was layered, faded, earth-colored, marked by age rather than design. She walked like someone used to ground that shifted beneath her feet, but knew it would hold this time. She stopped at the edge of the outer ridge, 30 paces from the fortress wall. Rayleigh's was already there, standing still, helmet cradled in one hand, the other resting on the parapet. "You are Rayleigh's," she said. He didn't answer. "You were," she continued. "Then you weren't. Then you were again, but not the same." Behind him, Halgren and Vexos approached, weapons raised but not aimed. Sorth stepped into position along the wall. Curve stood by the Vox Tower, though it hadn't transmitted in days. The woman looked at each of them. No hesitation. "Halgren," she said, "you still dream of snow that never fell." Halgren stiffened. "Karav," she said, "you wrote poetry once? In another tongue. The pages are still folded beneath your bunk." Karav said nothing. "Vexos," she said last, "you believed knowledge was clean." He stepped forward. "What are you?" She tilted her head. "That's the wrong question." "Then what is the question?" Rayleigh asked. She smiled, not kindly, not mockingly, as if the question had already been asked. "The question is, who dreamed me?" Silence followed, not the oppressive kind that Silux 112 had taught them to fear. Just stillness. "I am not chaos," she said. "I am not holy. I am not summoned. I did not emerge from warp, or ritual, or mistake." Sorth raised his crosier. "You are a psyker." She shook her head. "I am a memory." Rayleigh stepped down from the parapet, walking slowly toward her. She did not flinch. "Who's?" he asked. She looked past him, toward the kneeling statue, toward the child who wasn't there but had never truly left. "Not mine." She turned back to Rayleigh's. "Do you remember dreaming as a boy? Before your second heart, before the hypno-doctrines buried those soft things in ash?" "I don't," Rayleigh said. "But your body does," she replied. She stepped closer. The Astartes tensed. Her robe brushed the dirt, her bare feet silent on the stone. "I am what was left over," she said. "Not of you, of all of you. The dreaming mass, the residual hopes, the forgotten imaginings. You claim to be." Vexos hesitated. "A fragment, a shard," she answered. "An unfinished sentence in the Emperor's sleep." "No being has ever suggested he dreams," Sarth said, voice sharp. "No being has ever admitted that he doesn't," she replied. Rayleigh's looked into her eyes. They were gray, but behind the grata, not light, not void, just depth. The suggestion of contour without color, the place where detail hides before becoming real. "You are not flesh," he said. "I am pattern," she answered, given shape. Briefly, "I will not last." "Then why come?" "Because this world remembered me." She turned toward the chapel. "It was built by hands that forgot my name, but not my shape. It is the echo of a dream dreamed by dreamers long dead." You expect us to believe this? Vexos asked. She didn't answer him. She looked at the fortress, at the statues, at the lines etched into the stone by Raylus's own hand. You already do, she said. No defiance, no challenge, just fact. Raylus took another step. Why us? Because you were near, she said. You were clean, you were exact, and this world needed vectors of memory with structure. You brought that. To what end? To remember the rest, she said. To complete the shape. Karov looked to Sarth. What if she is a memory? Sarth's voice was colder than ever. Then memory is heresy. No, Raylus said, all turned. No, he repeated. If she is a memory, then she is our heresy. The woman turned to leave. No parting words. No plea, Raylus called after her. What happens next? She stopped. Nothing, she said, or everything. I won't choose. She vanished into the trees, leaving no footprints, only recognition. Only that unbearable familiarity that lingers in a name, never spoken aloud, yet always known. The first reports came from Halgren. He had been walking the edge of the orchard again, eyes scanning the canopy while Auspec's gear trailed faint patterns across the ground. At 4:47 local, he stopped, not from threat, from recognition. The trees were murmuring, not sound, not voice, not even breath, but presence. His mind itched, not like psychopressure, but like memory rising from somewhere it was never stored. A thought that didn't belong to him, shaped in his cadence. He turned to speak to Vareth, but found he already had his head tilted. Listening it wasn't conversation, it was awareness. The grove knew it was being watched, and it responded, not with hostility, with attention. By 5:03, 3 more Marines had reported similar phenomena. Vexos initiated localized cognitive scans. The readings were subtle, but consistent. Low-frequency, neural mimicry surrounding dense plant growth, particularly seedbeds and root clusters. No warp trace, no psychic leakage, no fauna interference. The soil carries imprint, Vexos said, kneeling in a vine-thick ravine. Not information, attention. These plants are not communicating. They are noticing. Sarth stood among twisted trunks, his Crozius inert at his side. He spoke aloud, not in benediction, but challenge. Who do you see? He asked. The silence returned, nothing. But Halgren flinched. I just remembered something I never knew, he muttered. A hand planting a seed. My hand, but smaller. And there was a name carved into the pot. But it wasn't mine. They brought the girl to the grove. She walked barefoot between stalks that bent ever so slightly toward her. Not enough to move, just enough to acknowledge. She did not sing. She listened. Raylus walked behind her, gauntlets unclenched. His armor no longer seemed weight-bearing, it seemed ceremonial. A relic, not a tool. As they reached the center of the orchard, the trees parted, without movement, without sound. In the clearing stood a single sapling, thin, pale, its bark white like bone left beneath moonlight. Around it, no grass grew. No other plant dared breach the circle. Raylus stepped forward. The girl did not follow. He reached out, touched the bark, hand felt. Not pain, not power. Memory. Hands that were not his. Faces he never saw. Sights from lives not lived. Fields tilled by generations long turned to ash. The emotions came not as images, but as impressions. Love that expected nothing. Fear shaped like duty. Hope muted by repetition. The sapling pulsed under his palm. Vexos scanned the base. Seed origin, no DNA trace. Not Xenos, not human. Something older. A pregenetic imprint, designed not to reproduce, but to recall. It's not alive in the way we define life, he said. It exists to witness. Sorth drew a blade. He hesitated only a moment. then sliced clean through the trunk. The sapling did not fall. The severed half remained in place, connected by no tissue. Suspended then, it began to grow again, in reverse. The bark healed up from the cut, the white flesh Within seconds, the tree was whole again. Not regrowth, Vexos said, stunned. Undoing, Halgren knelt near the roots. The soil there was soft, but every grain vibrated slightly, almost imperceptibly. He lowered his helmet mic, amplified the frequency. A rhythm, not music, breathing. The planet was not just remembering. It was recording. Through roots, through stems, through every vine and blade. Not to share, not to WEAPONIZE. To no, it's surveillance, Sarth said bitterly. Not spiritual, systemic. The world is watching itself, watching us. Rayleigh turned from the tree. No, he said, it isn't watching. He looked to the sky. It's waiting. Kurav approached him. Later, alone, beneath the grove's shadow. I buried something, he said quietly, in the north quadrant. Rayleigh raised an eyebrow. Kurav continued. I don't remember doing it, but I know I did. They walked to the spot. No markers, just soil. Kurav dropped to his knees and dug with bare hands. He unearthed a seed. Large, glassy. It pulsed faintly. I dreamed it, he whispered, and it was here. Rayleigh touched the seed and saw flames over a cradle, a lullaby in a language not known, a city built on vows never spoken, a hand, trembling, lowering this same seed into dirt. Hand. That hand was his. Rayleigh stood. No order was given, no scan run, because there was nothing left to classify. The planet had memory. The seeds carried thought. The trees remembered footsteps, and the roots waited, not for war, for return. The mound was never marked, no shrine, no monolith, just a rise in the earth, softened by age, covered in weeds that didn't flower, and dust that didn't drift. It lay beyond the orchard, past the perimeter stones. The squad no longer patrolled. There was no signal from it, no reason to search, until it began to breathe. At first, the heat was ambient, localized, gentle, almost medicinal, the kind felt when stepping into sunlit stone after dusk. But it persisted, then intensified. The soil glowed faintly in infrared, though no source presented itself. No geothermal vents, no plasma traces, just the steady, rhythmic pulse of warmth. Timed not to tectonic activity, but 2 heartbeats. Rayleigh was the one who ordered excavation, not from suspicion, from intuition. The girl had stopped walking the chapel. The candles now stayed lit, day and night, and the statues no longer wept. Something beneath the soil had taken their place. The Marines broke ground with their hands, not out of reverence, but because no tool wanted to bite. Shovels skidded off the topsoil. Auspex scanners looped. Vexos called it memory field reinforcement, as if the land remembered itself whole. So they made it forget, inch by inch, finger by finger. What emerged first was stone, black-ribbed, curved like the inside of a shell, not metallic, not organic, some intersection of both. Vexos noted Necron lattice patterns on one edge interlaced with Mechanicus design motifs. Impossible, heresy by construction, but it was there. Beneath it, bones. Human, arranged in fetal positions, each wrapped in strips of parchment inscribed with no language currently indexed in any Imperial archive. Symbols repeated themselves across the layers, not in warning, not in benediction, just labeling, as if each bone had a name. Not interment, Sarth said, cataloging. Deeper still, the heat intensified. Not enough to burn, enough to sweat, even through power armor, even through sealed systems. Rayleigh pulled a segment of plating from the earth, a chest piece, ceramite, but not from any current pattern. The Aquila was present, but inverted, stylized, drawn in spirals instead of wings. Vexos muttered, or Priam. Karav lifted a helm from the soil. It resembled Mark III design, but lacked any of the standardized venting systems. The faceplate was smooth, blank, mirrored dash-like. As he held it up, it reflected not his own visage, but someone else's, a man he'd never seen, but recognized. K. Rev dropped it. Rayleigh didn't flinch. He reached into the pit with both hands and uncovered the last object, a sarcophagus, half-crushed, seamless. Its surface was carved with tiny grooves, not mechanical, musical. Vexos scanned them. Tonal data, a song etched into steel, not lyrics, not a prayer notation. Rail is brushed dust from the top. A panel slid open. Inside, not a corpse, a machine. It resembled an astropathic relay, but fused to a human ribcage. Wires grew like roots from the bone, threading through circuits and into what remained of a heart pulsing weak. Steady. It's alive, Vexos said. Define alive, Rayleigh answered. The machine pulsed once more, and then it spoke, not aloud, not through vox. Into them. The words were not in Gothic, not even in sound. They came as a rhythm thudding between thoughts. We tried to hold it. Rayleigh stepped back. We did not fail. Sarth knelt beside the open pit. He bowed his head, not in submission. In translation, they didn't fight to win, he said. They fought to delay. Delay what? Halgren asked. The machine pulsed again. The end of forgetting. Kurov looked at the bones. These people? They didn't die in war. Rayleigh finished the thought. They became memory. Vexos analyzed the data strands feeding from the ribcage. The musical notations matched the girl's song, matched the frequencies from the sapling, matched the patterns in the statue's skin. All of it, he said, came from here. Silix 1:12 was not a world that remembered. It was a world that had been taught how, and the teachers had buried themselves with their lesson. Rayleigh stood at the edge of the grave. He didn't speak, because the heat had reached his boots, not from below, from within. His armor systems registered a core temperature rise. No infection, no malfunction, just warmth. He didn't stop it. The others followed, one by one, standing around the pit, hands at their sides. The sun did not rise. The girl did not sing. The wind did not move, but the ground was no longer cold. The grave no longer closed, and the memories no longer needed burial. It began with Halgren, not in ritual, not in defiance, just in stillness. He sat beneath the bone-white sapling long past dusk, his bolter unslung, his armor quiet, and he reached up slowly, as if through water, and released the seal on his helm. The hiss of depressurization was faint, almost embarrassed. Astartes' protocol demanded full armor integrity in all unsanctioned environments. It was doctrine. It was life. But Silex 112 didn't feel unsanctioned anymore. The air was cool, not sterile, scented faintly with petrichor and dry blossom. It filled his lungs in a way recirculated systems never had. He breathed once, twice, then looked up. The sky wasn't particularly remarkable gray-purple, with stars dulled by thin cloud cover, but he saw it, not as data, as sky. He didn't report the breach. By morning, Kurov followed. His helm clanked against the base of the perimeter wall, removed with quiet efficiency. He touched the stone, ran his fingers through the dust. It was soft, not chemically perfect, like mechanical spirified soil, but real textured. Sarth confronted them. "This is not liberty," he said. "It's erosion." "No," Kurov said, not looking up. "It's memory." Rayleigh said nothing. He stood on the central platform watching them, watching himself. By mid-cycle 5 Astartes had unsealed. Some sat beneath the orchard. Others stood motionless before the statues. One Vareth walked barefoot through the chapel, each step silent on ancient stone. The transformation was not physical, no muscle loss, no degeneration. But their stance changed, their movement, their focus. The tactical sharpness dulled, not from sloth, from disinterest. Vexos ran neural scans. Cognitive discipline remained intact, but synaptic weighting had shifted. Emotional processing began to outcompete reflex prioritization. The mind did not become slower. It became selective. "They're choosing not to act," he reported. "Isn't that corruption?" Sarth asked. "No," Vexos said. "It's preference." That was more dangerous. Rayleigh walked the perimeter alone. His helm stayed on, but the seal was disengaged. He could feel the breeze now. It was thin, almost lazy, but it carried warmth that spoke of something more than temperature. The kind of warmth that reminds you have skin. He thought of past deployments, of cathedrals burned, of fortresses fallen, of vox chatter filled with screams, then silence. He thought of the Codex, of its steel certainty, and for the first time in years, he wondered what it would feel like to laugh. The girl passed him in the orchard. She didn't speak. She never did, but her eyes lingered on his helm. He understood. That night, Rayleigh's unsealed, not before his men, not his declaration. Alone, he placed the helm on the chapel altar and breathed, not functionally, deliberately. His breath filled the space like incense. Vexos did not follow. He maintained full seal, not out of discipline, out of fear, not for himself, for them. "They are unraveling," he told Sarth. "We're watching the decay of command." "No," Sarth replied. "We're watching what was underneath command." The next morning, Halgren wept. No shame, no confusion. He sat on the ridge and let tears streak down skin that hadn't felt air in decades. "What are you mourning?" Kurav asked. "Nothing," Halgren said. "That's why Rayleigh's ordered no punishment. He logged no transgression, because this wasn't disobedience. It was hunger, not for violence, not for power, for life. Astartes were not made for peace, but neither were they made for wanting Silex. 112 offered nothing seductive, no promise of reward, no embrace of ecstasy, just quiet, and in that quiet, they began to remember the feel of stone underfoot, the taste of unsweetened water, the sound of breath drawn without urgency, not luxuries, not corruption, just the unspoken pieces of being. Sarth approached Rayleigh's at dusk. They stood beneath the fading sky, the first stars beginning to pierce the gray. "Will you return to the Codex?" Sarth asked. Rayleigh's looked at his hands. They were scarred, calloused, armored still but light. "Would the Codex remember me?" "It would obey you." Rayleigh shook his head. "That's not the same. No orders were given that day, and none were needed. The Marines moved where they wished, sat where they felt, spoke only when thought became weight. They did not become idle. They became aware." Sarth removed his helm that night, slowly, not because he agreed, because he, too, wanted to know, not what the world was, but what he had forgotten he was. And the air was warm. The river was not wide. It did not roar. It had no name. It curved softly through the eastern basin, weaving between pale stones and hollowed roots. Its surface was unbroken, unnaturally still, as if the water had long since forgotten how to ripple. No fauna drank from it. No leaves floated, but it beckoned. Rayleigh stood at its edge, bareheaded armor unsealed. The girl stood beside him, feet submerged already, dress soaked to the hem. She looked at him once, no smile. No command, then turned and walked into the current dot. The Marines followed, not in formation, not by order. They came because the time had arrived. Vareth entered first, stepping into the shallows with the caution of a man who wasn't afraid of drowning, but of being changed. The water reached his knees, then his waist. then his shoulders, and then he sank beneath. No struggle, no breath, just descent. Seconds passed, a minute, 2, 3. No movement. Halgren followed, then Kuref Sarth came last. Crozius left on the bank, robes trailing behind him like shed liturgy. He did not pray. They submerged themselves into a river that had never been blessed. Rayleigh waited. He counted the minutes. 5 past 6. Then Vareth surfaced. No gasp, no choking, just emergence. His eyes open, face calm. Not different, not alien, but relieved, like someone waking from a sentence they hadn't known was being spoken. He climbed the shore in silence, sat beneath a tree, and smiled. The others emerged in time, each with the same stillness. Not euphoric, not broken, just returned. Sarth surfaced last. His eyes, too, were calm. He reached for his Crozius, stopped, let his hand drop. Rayleigh approached the edge. The girl stood mid-river, now motionless. The current moved around her like reverence. He stepped in. The water was cold, not physically, but in the way old things are. He waited until he stood before her. "I won't forget," he said. She reached up, pressed her hand to his chest plate. Not to push, not to bless, to acknowledge. He sank down through silence, down through memory. The water closed above him, and what waited below was not darkness, it was sequence. He saw them all, lives unlived, futures unwritten, pasts that never belonged to him but wore his face. He was a child again, but not on Terra. He was a farmer, a poet, a builder of empty cities. His hands bore no weapons. His eyes held no targets. He had never spoken in code, never been baptized in Ashdot, and none of it was illusion. It was possibility, not granted, not promised, just remembered. When he emerged, the sky had dimmed. The others stood along the bank, still and silent. Rayleigh looked down at his arms. The armor had darkened and not painted, not damaged, just changed. A faint pattern curled along the vambrace, not an aquila, not a sigil, a spiral, drawn in dust and time. Vexos met him on the shore. He had not entered the river. His helm remained sealed. "You've crossed a line," he said. Rayleigh nodded. "Yes, you abandoned command." "No," Rayleigh replied. "I fulfilled it." Sorth turned to Vexos. "You stayed dry." "My oath is sealed in code," Vexos said. "Then you've never drowned," Sorth replied. No reprimand came, no argument followed. The moment was too full, of breath, of change, of something that couldn't be debriefed. They returned to the fortress wet, silent, and whole. Not reborn, not absolved, just different. Not enough to name, but enough to notice. The signal came at dawn, simple, direct, no encryption, extraction approved, vector inbound. The ship was one of theirs, a strike cruiser of the Iron Cincture's own fleet, the unyielding Silence. It appeared above Silix 112 with mechanical precision, dropping from high orbit without gravitation pulse or warning flare. No escort, no comes, just mass and intent, blotting out a segment of the sky, like a memory surfacing without invitation. Rayleigh stood on the parapet of the fortress, helm off, robes drawn over armor that no longer gleamed. The others gathered behind him, silent, watching, their armor mismatched by mud and river light. The child sat cross-legged atop the wall, humming softly, more to herself now than to them. The ship did not descend, it held position, kilometers above, close enough to cast shadow, far enough to remain apart. Vexos approached Rayleigh with full seals engaged. His voice came brittle through external vox. "They should be deploying drop pods, or There's no movement," Rayleigh nodded. "They're waiting." Sarth stepped forward. "For what?" Rayleigh didn't answer. Because they all knew. The squad had logged their location, confirmed survival. Protocol had been followed. Response time was correct. But the ship was not here to rescue. It was here to witness. At 8:03 local, a transmission arrived. Not encoded, not structured, just 6 words, spoken in a tone too familiar to dismiss. "We remember you. We are watching." The voice was flat, neutral, impossible to source, not mechanical, not artificial. But known? Rayleigh closed his eyes. "It's our own." Vexos's Uspex flared. The cruiser's weapon systems were offline. Its bays remained closed. It showed no aggression, no affection, either. The Marines waited for the next command. It never came. Kurov sat down on the stone, helm in his lap. "We aren't being extracted," he said. "No," Halgren said. "We're being acknowledged." Sarth clenched his jaw. "That is not protocol." "No," Rayleigh said. "It's response." Vexos moved to the Vox Tower, connected the uplink. He tried to hail the cruiser directly. 4 times. Once by designation, once by chapter cipher, once by High Gothic, once by emergency override. The same reply came each time. "We remember you." That was all. At midday, the ship shifted position. Not closer, higher. Its silhouette blurred slightly in the upper atmosphere. Clouds passed beneath it like unspoken verdicts. Rayleigh finally spoke. "They're not coming." Vexos turned, furious. "Then we summon them. We force dissent. We remind them of who we are." Rayleigh met his gaze. "And if they already know?" Sorth looked skyward. "Then this is not punishment." "No," Rayleigh said. "It's rejection. Not cruel, not angry, just quiet. The kind of rejection that doesn't push, just steps back." Vexos disconnected from the tower. "We are stranded." Rayleigh shook his head. "We are seen." "Same thing," Vexos muttered. That night, the ship dimmed. Its lights faded to minimal burn. Still visible. Still hovering, like a lantern left in the woods, not guiding anyone home. "Just letting you know where home I sent." Single quotes. The Marines held no vigil. There was no ceremony, no rage, no despair, only stillness. The girl stood with Rayleigh atop the chapel roof. The wind combed her hair in slow, silent strands. "They won't land," she said. Rayleigh nodded. "Because they understand. They're afraid. Wouldn't you be?" She didn't answer. She looked at the stars. "There's a world in that ship," she whispered. "One that forgot how to dream." Rayleigh said nothing, because she wasn't wrong, and because he'd once lived in that world too. When morning came, the ship was still there, and still silent. They no longer looked up. They no longer waited. The fortress gates remained open. The chapel candles still burned. The river ran with memory. And above it all, a single vessel watched, not in judgment, but in quiet failure to understand what had already changed. The vote was never spoken. No hands were raised. No words were exchanged. The decision passed through them like weather, quiet, slow, inevitable. By the 3rd day, under the watchful shadow of the unyielding silence, the last traces of protocol dissolved. No rotations, no status reports, no final transmission. They simply stayed, not in defiance, not in disgrace, in peace. Kurov found a rusted trowel in one of the old storage bays beneath the chapel. He did not clean it. He took it to the edge of the orchard and began to dig. The soil was loose, responsive. It turned with ease, soft and wet with memory. He dropped the first seed into the hole, not knowing its type, just knowing it belonged. Verith followed. He didn't dig. He sat in the dirt with his gloves off and ran his fingers through the soil like someone reacquainting themselves with the idea of touch. He hummed off-key, tuneless. The sound did not carry far, but it stayed by nightfall. 5 of them had begun tending. No formation, no plan. Just rhythmed out. The girl watched them from the steps of the chapel, not smiling, just present. Rayleigh's took longer. He walked the perimeter twice that evening, not patrolling, saying goodbye to the walls that had once made him, goodbye to the silence of steel, to the routines that had once kept his mind tight, his heart sealed. He stood in the old command tower for hours. The console still blinked softly. It hadn't been touched since the cruiser arrived. The uplink light was steady, green, ready. He let it blink. In the morning, he brought out a spade, not from storage, from beneath the floorboards of the chapel. Someone sometime had hidden it there, as if saving it for this. He planted beside Helgren. Neither spoke. Vexos stood alone. His armor was immaculate, fully sealed. He had maintained every ritual, repeated every litany, filed every code in private, refusing the drift. But now he watched them with unreadable stillness. Sarth approached him slowly, placing a hand on his pauldron. "Don't have to choose today," the chaplain said. Vexos didn't respond, because he already had, by remaining. Not reporting, not leaving, stayed, because the question was no longer survival. It was belonging, and Silex 112 had offered them something no war zone ever had. Not purpose, permission to slow, to feel, to remember. By the 5th day, a garden had formed. It was crude, uneven, but real. Rows of things not yet growing. An act of faith, not in outcome, but in presence. Rayleigh's carved his chapter symbol into a stone near the river, but he carved it shallow, not to last, just to mark. The girl stood beside him when he finished. "What now?" she asked. He looked up at the sky. The unyielding silence still hovered there, watching. He didn't answer, because now had already happened. This was not a rebellion. This was a surrender, not of loyalty, of need. They needed rest, needed air, needed to stop carrying. And Silex 112 asked nothing of them. It did not demand blood. It did not promise redemption. It only said, "Stay, if you wish." They did. Halgren etched words into the fortress wall. Not vows, names, people he couldn't prove existed. People he remembered only in dreams. Curve sang Verith painted. Sorth meditated beside the sapling, now 2 meters tall, its leaves whispering to him in wind that no longer moved. Vexos sat in his armor, unmoving, listening, his seals unbroken, but his posture had changed. He no longer faced the sky, he faced the garden at dusk. Rayleigh walked to the console one last time. He keyed in a message, not to the cruiser, to no one. He did not send it, he just typed it, line by line, then closed the console. He left it there, for whoever came next, if anyone ever did. He rose just before first light. There was no announcement, no speech, no invocation of duty. Rayleigh simply stood from his bunk in the old chapel barracks, draped the outer robe he had taken from the reliquary weeks before, and walked out beneath the gray-gold sky. His steps were slow, unhurried, without ceremony. He passed the garden where Helgren hummed softly to newly sprouted stalks, past the child sitting cross-legged at the chapel threshold, tracing spirals into the dust with her finger, past Vexos, still sealed, still silent, seated beneath the shrine that no longer bore a name. He said nothing, but they all saw him. They stood, they followed, not close, not crowding. Just near. Rayleigh walked to the field beyond the perimeter stones, where nothing had ever been planted, where no structure stood, where the wind did not sing, and the soil remained undisturbed. He crossed the boundary slowly, like someone returning to a home no longer marked on any map. At the center of the empty field, he stopped, looked up. The unyielding silence still hovered, distant, watching. Rayleigh did not raise his hand. He lowered himself to the ground, not in defeat, in completion. He lay on his back, armor still adorned, robes loose around his shoulders, eyes open. The sky above him was soft, unchanging, the kind of sky that does not promise storm or salvation, just permanence. The others formed a wide circle around him. None spoke. None moved closer. They knew this was not for them. It was for him. Rayleigh did not close his eyes, but they did. One by one, not in grief, in respect. The girl stood at the edge of the field, her hands folded in front of her. She said no words, no farewell. She watched, as if witnessing something older than endings. The first change was so subtle, no one noticed. The grass around him darkened, not with shadow, with moisture. The soil beneath his armor grew damp, not from rain, from absorption.ve. XOS recorded the moment, then deactivated his scanner. It was not data, it was return. The process took hours. Rayleigh's did not rot. He did not break. He softened. His breath slowed, then stopped. But there was no death rattle, no final gasp. His body did not collapse. It was taken cell by cell, muscle unthreaded into loam, bones softened like sediment, veins receded, nerves unwound. The grass grew greener, the earth darker and still. His armor remained, pristine, unmoved. It sat atop the patch of soil that now steamed gently in the cold light. By dusk, Rayleigh's was gone. No bones, no blood, no trace, only the armor and the shape of a body that the world had not swallowed, but welcomed. Sarth stepped forward first. He knelt beside the armor, placed his hand upon the breastplate, bowed his head. Kurov followed, then Hel, then Verith. They did not speak, because this was not mourning. This was recognition. Rayleigh's had not fallen. He had joined. He had become what Silex 112 had always offered. Not absolution, not purpose, not place. That night, the field glowed faintly, not with light, with warmth. The garden grew taller. The candles in the chapel flared, and the girl, alone in the sanctuary, whispered a name once, just once. And it stayed. He rose, just before first light. There was no announcement, no speech, no invocation of duty. Rayleigh's simply stood from his bunk in the old chapel barracks, draped the outer robe he had taken from the reliquary weeks before, and walked out beneath the gray-gold sky. His steps were slow, unhurried, without ceremony. He passed the garden where Halgren hummed softly to newly sprouted stalks, past the child sitting cross-legged at the chapel threshold, tracing spirals into the dust with her finger, past Vexos, still sealed, still silent, seated beneath the shrine that no longer bore a name. He said nothing, but they all saw him. They stood, they followed, not close, not crowding, just near. Rayleigh's walked to the field beyond the perimeter stones, where nothing had ever been planted, where no structure stood, where the wind did not sing and the soil remained undisturbed. He crossed the boundary slowly, like someone returning to a home no longer marked on any map. At the center of the empty field, he stopped, looked up. The unyielding silence still hovered, distant, watching. Rayleigh's did not raise his hand. He lowered himself to the ground, not in defeat, in completion. He lay on his back, armor still adorned, robes loose around his shoulders, eyes open. The sky above him was soft, unchanging, the kind of sky that does not promise storm or salvation, just permanence. The others formed a wide circle around him. None spoke. None moved closer. They knew this was not for them. It was for him. Rayleigh's did not close his eyes, but they did, one by one, not in grief, in respect. The girl stood at the edge of the field, her hands folded in front of her. She said no words, no farewell. She watched, as if witnessing something older than endings. The first change was so subtle, no one noticed. The grass around him darkened, not with shadow, with moisture. The soil beneath his armor grew damp, not from rain, from absorption.vexos recorded the moment, then deactivated his scanner. It was not data, it was return. The process took hours. Rayleigh's did not rot. He did not break. He softened. His breath slowed, then stopped. But there was no death rattle, no final gasp. His body did not collapse. It was taken cell by cell, muscle unthreaded into loam, bones softened like sediment, veins receded, nerves unwound. The grass grew greener, the earth darker and still. His armor remained pristine, unmoved. It sat atop the patch of soil that now steamed gently in the cold light. By dusk, Rayleigh's was gone. No bones, no blood, no trace, only the armor and the shape of a body that the world had not swallowed, but welcomed. Sarth stepped forward first. He knelt beside the armor, placed his hand upon the breastplate, bowed his head. Karav followed, then Vareth. They did not speak, because this was not mourning, this was recognition. Rayleigh's had not fallen, he had joined. He had become what Silex 112 had always offered. Not absolution, not purpose. Place. Night. The field glowed faintly, not with light, with warmth. The garden grew taller. The candles in the chapel flared, and the girl, alone in the sanctuary, whispered a name. Once, just once, and it stayed. Some worlds are not won. Some are not even lost. They are simply marked, crossed out in silence on a data slate, no longer powered, left to die in darkness between fleet rotations. There are planets in the Imperium that rot beneath golden banners, not because of rebellion, or Xenos, or corruption, but because they were never meant to survive. Worlds that do not burn, worlds that do not scream, worlds that simply wait for judgment, knowing it will come in armor, the color of old vows. There is no ceremony, no last plea, only the cold logic of the Codex, and the softer, stranger codes that live inside the hearts of Astartes when they walk among civilians who cannot be saved. This is the story of those forgotten planets and the men sent not to fight for them, but to end them, not with hatred, but with duty. If this story pulls you into the shadows between stars, where duty outweighs salvation, and the only justice is issued by gauntlets shaped like shrines, then remain with us. Subscribe, share, and leave your mark beneath this chronicle, because stories like this are not preserved by archives. They survive through memory.sylx-112, spun beneath them like a prayer someone had stopped saying halfway through. Blue swirled with rust-colored countenance that seemed too smooth, too arranged. It looked untouched, a painter's world. No orbital scars, no flickering defense grids, no debris from the wars that usually left a world breathing shallow. But the void around it hummed, as if something had exhaled recently and the air hadn't settled yet. Captain Rayleigh stood at the observation lumen, helmet in the crook of his elbow, eyes locked on the surface. He didn't blink, not because of training, but because he didn't want to miss the moment it changed, and he knew it would. They always did, even the quiet ones, especially the quiet ones. The order had come through direct line encryption, not from segmentum command, not from any named authority. It had no signature, no sigil, just hard coordinates burned onto a data slate, with one accompanying line etched in low Gothic. Unsustainable trajectory. Resolve. There were no historical briefs, not even an estimation of local resistance. Just silence. That silence had reached the squad. It carried more weight than any war cry. 12 Astartes of the Iron Cincture chapter prepared without a word. No battle hymns. No invocations. Each warrior knew what this kind of mission meant. It wasn't annihilation. It wasn't suppression. It was correction. Quiet correction. The kind the Imperium doesn't put in its records. They didn't deploy as a strike force. No coordinated descent in Stormbirds or drop pods. No planetary broadcast of arrival. They went in staggered, one by one, spaced hours apart. Rayleigh's first, then Chaplain Sarth, then the apothecary. each insertion masked in orbital static, ghosted to appear as meteor scatter. It wasn't just secrecy. It was ritual. You don't land like a liberator on a world marked for deletion. You arrive like an echo. Rayleigh's entered low orbit, encased in a one-man re-entry coffin. No Auspex trail, no engine signature. The silence stretched long enough to feel personal. The pod punched through the atmosphere, friction lathing the hull in plasma-white glow. But it didn't roar. It hissed, as if even the air knew to keep its voice down. He emerged onto Highland stone, the kind that breaks under boot but never shifts. Wind carried no scent, no dust, just motion, as if the planet breathed, but didn't care about lungs. The landscape stretched endless ridgelines covered in vegetation that looked edible, but wasn't. That was already confirmed. Pre-deployment scans showed synthetic sugars in local fruit structures, designed to trigger metabolic hunger without providing caloric return. A trap, a planetary joke. The world fed famine, not as punishment, but as experiment. Rayleigh's moved without urgency, bolter stowed. His armor marked him clearly, ceramite gleaming in faded bronze and gray. The iron cincture's colors dulled by ash from 100 prior cullings. No chapter markings on his pauldron, just the eye of judgment. Not a symbol, a warning. The first outpost came an hour after landing. No sentries, no movement, but signs of maintenance. Solar panels clean, pathways swept, as if someone expected visitors. He entered. The door didn't creak. It opened like it had been oiled that morning. Inside, furniture arranged, lights functional, no dust. A data slate on the table blinked with a green light. No encryption. Rayleigh's picked it up. One file, one line, no introduction. "We knew you would come." He didn't react, just filed it. But something shifted behind his ribs. Not fear, recognition. Like walking into a room you've never seen and knowing where every object is before you turn the light on. Hours passed. Sorth arrived. The chaplain wore his skull helm, unpainted, pitted from prior deployments. He didn't speak, just nodded and knelt in the dirt outside the outpost. Began marking something. Rayleigh's watched as Sarth traced a circle around the building, inscribing it with the litany of unmaking, not spoken, etched. He used the tip of his crozius, like a stylus, scratching phrases into stone. When finished, he stood. "No screams," he said, voice flat. "No resistance." Rayleigh's nodded. "Not yet." They waited for the apothecary. When Vexos arrived, he carried more than Medicaid gear. He brought bone readers, atmospheric gene sequencers, Vox pulse analyzers tuned to infrasound. The instruments reported abnormalities, not contaminants, not mutagens, just presence, a kind of echo inside the flora. The trees pulsed low-frequency tones, too deep for human hearing, but calibrated to mammalian brainwave ranges. Not communication, influence. Rayleigh's reviewed the data, then shut the slate. They're not being attacked, they're being remembered. That night, if this planet kept such rhythms, they set camp without fire. Power sources dimmed to passive draw. Helmets stayed on. Rayleigh's didn't sleep, but he didn't move either. He let his breath synchronize with the strange thrum coming from the stone beneath them. It wasn't noise. It was directionless music, a rhythm with no composer. He thought of the phrase on the original slate, unsustainable trajectory. It wasn't about war. It wasn't about politics. It was about something else. A shift. A slow slide into a pattern the Imperium didn't recognize, couldn't allow. This wasn't a threat. It was a divergence. And divergence, in the eyes of Terra, was heresy even when it didn't bleed. Rayleigh's closed his eyes, not to rest, but to listen deeper. From beneath the stone, the planet whispered, and it whispered his name. Continue. The fortress rose from the earth, like a tooth that had grown too long in the jaw of a corpse. Thick walls, pocked with old impacts, draped in creeping vines that didn't choke so much as cradle. Its ramparts were intact barely, but the void shield pylons hadn't flickered in decades. The Astartes approached without camouflage, their footfalls echoing across the slate road carved into the mountain pass, like a scar that never healed right. No warning klaxon, no targeting oos, just the sound of old gates groaning open, not by machine, but by hand. They waited for them, men in flak armor, sun-bleached to the point of anonymity, Lazarafals slung more like memory than weapon. Their uniforms bore no unit sigils, only medals, rows of them, shining where nothing else shined. Some held their chests as if expecting salutes. Others watched with the brittle caution of those who had waited too long for relief and grown suspicious of its arrival. Rayleigh stepped forward. Imperial Compliance Code, Iron Cincture, he said. He didn't raise his voice. If these were traitors, they would have fired already. If they were mad, they would have asked for food or begged for death. But they did neither. One man limped forward, his face lined with dust and something deeper. He raised a hand, not in challenge but in greeting. "We knew you'd come," he said, the same words. Rayleigh's didn't flinch. The man's name, if it still held meaning, was Provost Aurel. That's what the old code plate on his chest read, though it was half obscured by oxidized badges. He led them inside, past sentry towers, still manned by motionless figures. Servitor? No. Soldiers. Breathing, watching, not twitching, not whispering, just waiting. The courtyard showed signs of ritual maintenance. Parade lines swept, statues unchipped, but no drills, no fresh paint, no sound of training. It was like the garrison preserved the idea of readiness without the act of preparing. Chaplain Sarth stopped at a shrine to the Emperor, faded, water-stained, but still intact. The candles were melted to stubs, long since dried, but someone had replaced the incense just that morning. The scent hung sharp in the cold air, clove and promethium ash. "They still pray," Sarth said, low. Rayleigh's nodded. "Not to win, to be seen." Inside the central keep, the story unfolded not in records, but in dust. The cogitator logs were intact. Vexos interfaced and began extraction. Thousands of entries. Patrol schedules, water rationing rotations, threat status reports logged in sequence, but all marked as deferred to command. No acknowledgements, no responses. The last confirmed contact was 117 years prior, a standard request for reinforcement. Logged, then silence. They hadn't been dismissed. They'd been forgotten. "We held," Aurel said, pouring recaf from a cracked dispenser. The liquid hissed with age, but he drank it anyway. "Command told us to fortify, so we did. Told us to watch the ridge lines, so we did. Told us the enemy would return. And did they?" Rayleigh's asked. Aurel looked past him, toward the inner walls. Toward nothing. They never left. Sirth's gauntlet tightened around the grip of his Crozius. "There are no signs of recent conflict," Vexos said, scrolling data. "No munitions expenditure. No power surges. No corpse fields. No impact craters. No external breach." Rayleigh's turned back to Aurel. "Then what have you been fighting?" The man's expression cracked. Not with fear, with memory. "The absence," he said. No one spoke after that. The garrison's barracks housed hundreds. Only a few dozen still lived. The others weren't dead. They had simply gone. Not into graves. Not into the hills. Just gone. Their bunks left made. Their boots still aligned beneath iron-framed beds. No sign of struggle. No sign of transport. The regiment had thinned itself through attrition without death. Silex 112 didn't kill. It wore down. It didn't burn bodies. It wore out presence. Rayleigh's walked through a corridor lined with mission statements etched into the walls. Morale litanies. Quotes from commanders who had likely died centuries ago. each inscribed by hand, not as command, as comfort. We maintained structure, Aurel said, following behind like a caretaker of a mausoleum who had never admitted the bodies were missing. We repeated orders, maintained drills, read the manuals, and when the manuals stopped working, Rayleigh asked. They still sounded correct, Aurel replied. A flag still flew above the central spire, torn, but not from battle, from age. The Aquila, half-faded. Beneath it, a plaque bore the original deployment date, M39. The world had been fortified in a prior millennium and left. Not decommissioned, not failed, just excluded from memory. Rayleigh's returned to the squad. The others had arrived, 6 more Astartes, all standing still in the lower courtyard. They had received no signal from orbit. The ship's vox was silent, but the Marines arrived anyway, because they were meant to, and the garrison accepted them, not with fear, with understanding. Double quotes. Do they know why we're here? Vexos asked. They do, Rayleigh said. Sarth stepped forward. Will they resist? Rayleigh watched a trooper kneeling in the yard, polishing his las rifle with a cloth worn thin to translucency. The man did not look up. No, Rayleigh said. They've already surrendered. Not to us, to the pattern. Above them, the wind shifted. For the first time, it carried sound, not words, not music, just cadence. The rhythm of a world rehearsing its own death so many times that it no longer needed rehearsal. The fortress would not fall. It had already served its purpose. It had been built to endure abandonment, and it had. The stream ran like any other on a world still pretending to live. Clear unclouded, cold from alpine snowmelt, Astartes, Auspex's reed, no toxin spikes, no bacterial irregularity, no warp taint, just hydrogen, oxygen, and trace minerals. Vexos dipped a gloved finger into the flow, withdrew a sample, and sealed it into a sterile vial. But before he placed it into the processor, he stopped. The surface tension clung too tightly, as if the water didn't want to leave. He logged the hesitation. Even that had become part of the method. On Silex 112, hesitation was data. They had begun their field survey at dawn, not by sun, but by chronometer. This planet's rotation was stable, its light consistent, but that consistency had already proven to be false. Crops grew in prefab agrodomes north of the fortress, rows of them, precise, neat, enhanced grain strains from Mechanicus vaults sprouted on schedule. Some had even begun to fruit, but no animal fed from them. No bird nested nearby, and when Vexos checked the cellular integrity of the harvest, he found genetic drift, not decay, not disease, just evasion. The grain contained nutrients, but not where they should be. Protein clusters moved. Sugars folded away. Photosynthesis without caloric consequence. Everything grows, Rayleigh said, staring across the fields, and nothing survives. The livestock pens were worse. Dozens of animals, grox variants, foul analogs, synthetic herdstockel breathing, all healthy by measure, but they didn't eat. They stood near troughs and stared at them. One grox had starved to death, belly full of fermented cud. It had chewed for hours without swallowing. When the apothecary cut it open, he found a brain dense with synaptic redundancy, not damage, not trauma, just confusion. Neural pathways too layered, too folded, as if the animal had been designed to think without reason. This world simulates prosperity, Vexos concluded, sealing another sample, but only long enough to break pattern recognition. Not chaos, Sorth asked. No signs, Vexos replied. No warp corruption, no exviral sequences, no cognitive implants, just performance. Rayleigh knelt near a patch of soil and ran his gauntlet through it, moist, rich, saturated with nitrogen compounds, a perfect growth medium. but the root structures of the nearby plants were shallow, as if the flora refused to anchor. They grew tall, beautiful, then collapsed. The water sustained none of it. They traced the stream back toward its source. It split the land like a surgical incision, too straight, too smooth. Trees lined its edges, but bore no scars from seasonal shift. Leaves didn't fall. Branches didn't break. Rayleigh reached out and snapped one. It broke with too much ease, like glass. The inside was hollow, artificial. No, Vexos said, natural, but not honest. They reached the spring just before night. It emerged from a cliff face, no cave, no aquifer, just an aperture in the rock shaped like a mouth that forgot how to close. The water bubbled up and poured into the basin below. Sarth stood beside it, Crozius across his back, reading from the Catechism of Purity. The words sounded absurd here, too structured, too rhythmic. The spring did not rebel against them. It absorbed them. The water listens, he said. Rayleigh drew his bolter knot in readiness, but instinct, the kind of readiness that has no target. There was something wrong with the flow, not speed, not clarity, just weight. It fell too heavily. Each drop struck the rocks with more force than mass should allow. It sounded like it wanted to be louder. Vex ran a long wave test. The water didn't carry sound through itself broadcast sound back, echoes from submerged stone, repeating phrases in tonal resonance, not words, emotional signatures. The Auspex couldn't translate them, but the Marines felt them. Guilt, longing, hunger, not for food, for use. Everything here wants to be needed, Sarth whispered. They gathered more samples, not for analysis, but containment. The water had memory, the kind that doesn't store information, but repeats behavior. Vexos described it as cognitive mimicry, liquid that remembered the shape of purpose and attempted to recreate it, but never fully. Rayleigh looked across the basin and saw reflections that didn't match. His own face, yes, but younger. His helm cradled in his arm, battle-scarred but smiling. He blinked. It didn't. He stepped back. The image rippled, then vanished. Threshold. That was what this was. Not infection, not invasion, a test. The planet wasn't killing. It was tempting. It offered function, routine, the trappings of sustenance. But every process, every cycle, led to futility. A world engineered for compliance, not through control, but through hope. Keep planting, keep feeding, keep waiting, because maybe tomorrow, the harvest will hold. Maybe tomorrow, the meat will taste right. Maybe tomorrow, the water won't lie. Rayleigh turned from the spring. End survey. No further study. Vexos hesitated. We need more. No. Rayleigh locked eyes with him. We're not here to understand. We're here to decide. They returned to the fortress as the false sun dipped behind the ridge. The water in their samples sloshed, but never mixed. Each vial behaved like its own mind. In the courtyard, the garrison stood silently. No drills, no evening rites, just observation. They watched the Astartes like statues waiting for orders. Sarth broke the silence. The Emperor once said that to build is to bless. To grow is to glorify. Rayleigh nodded. Then this world is a heretic in disguise, because here, everything grows and nothing feeds. The Vox began humming at 311 local. No trigger, no contact, just a tone, pure and sustained, through all channels simultaneously, even encrypted ones, even shortwave bursts sealed behind Imperial cipher. Vexos caught it first. His helm recalibrated for seismic interference, but what came through wasn't feedback, it was voice, not adult, not machine, not spirit, a child. Female, high register, fragile, repeating lines in a cadence that wasn't prayer but new prayer's shape, a whisper-worn nursery rhythm. The kind spoken too often by those who forgot the meaning but not the comfort. Stars above, stars below. The Emperor watches, but never shows. Hold the line and count to 9. Blood is water, faith is time. Again and again. The voice had no reverb, no modulation, not a recording from an ecclesiarch's data vault. It sounded present, intimate, like a girl reciting to herself in a locked room, over and over, not for an audience but to keep something away, or to invite something back. They triangulated the signal within 30 minutes, not to a transmitter, but to an empty bunker beneath the fortress, one the garrison didn't acknowledge. When Rayleigh questioned them, Aurel stared without recognition, as if the coordinates spoken aloud didn't map to anything his mind would hold. When shown pics, he simply said, "We bricked that place up years ago, yet the walls were clean. Sealed, yes, but recent. No structural degradation, no signs of damage. The stone looked poured, not quarried." Vexos confirmed, ferrocrit-laced biocellant imperial standard but applied unevenly, almost afraid. Like whoever sealed the room wanted it closed fast, not well. Sarth approached first, reciting low Gothic benedictions beneath his breath, not to purify the place, but to stabilize his thoughts. The voice didn't react, it kept reciting. "Faith is stone, and stone is light. The sun forgets, but prayers are right." Rayleigh ordered the breach. They didn't use melta charges. They cut carefully, by hand. Chain blades etching through concrete like bone. No sparks, no resistance. Only dust that smelled like old paper and something fainter, milk left out too long. The door gave way, darkness. No power, no ambient glow. Helm lamps flared. The space was narrow, rectangular, lined with cogitator banks long since dry. No life, just a desk. A chair, a child's doll slumped in the corner, hand-stitched, Imperial Guard pattern. Button eyes. One missing dot. The voice persisted, louder now, as if proximity mattered. But no speaker was found, no source, no emitter. VEXOS ran spectrum sweeps. The Vox signal registered as signal, yes, but it had no frequency origin. It came from within, not spiritually, physically. The structure itself was broadcasting, not relaying. "The stone is remembering," he said. Rayleigh stood in the middle of the room. The sound pressed into him, but not hard. It folded around his armor like a shroud sewn from lullabies. The child's voice trembled now, not in fear, in routine. "She's not warning anyone," Sarth said. "She's remembering something she was told to say." "But told by whom?" Rayleigh asked. They reviewed the garrison's logs. Nothing listed the chamber. No records of children on site. No displaced families. But there had been a time, Aurel admitted, when the fortress had auxiliary staff, non-combatants, civilians, supporters, for the old regiment. Before the long silence, he said, before the sky closed. They'd been evacuated, he believed, sent off-world when reinforcement failed, but no ships had ever docked, no transport logs recovered, just a growing absence of names. Silex 112 had not purged its citizens. It had let them vanish. Rayleigh's returned to the chamber that night, alone, helm removed. No Vox, no ooze, just breath and steel and a voice too young to mean harm. Stars above. He sat in the chair. The doll was still in the corner. He looked at the walls. Nothing inscribed, nothing marked. Just smooth surfaces, too smooth. Not polished, worn, as if hands had pressed here for years. The voice faltered. Hold the line. A pause, then weeping, not loud. Just the kind of weeping that doesn't expect rescue. Rayleigh's didn't. Moved, not out of fear, out of deference. This wasn't haunting. It wasn't warped trickery. It wasn't even desperation. It was ritual. A small mind looped into preservation. The Vox relays confirmed no atmospheric breach. The signal never left the room. But the Astartes, had heard it planet-wide. Because it wasn't broadcast, it was remembered, echoed by soil, reinforced by stone. A child's last words, repeated until even the planet began to join in. When Rayleigh left, he ordered the room resealed, not as command, as mercy. He did not purge the recording. He did not silence the frequency. He simply said, "Let her speak," because some prayers aren't requests. They're reminders, and some memories do not seek justice. They just don't want to be forgotten. It began without ceremony. Brother Vareth was first. During rest cycle, his vitals shifted, heartbeat decelerated, cortical activity surged. Nothing dangerous, nothing unexplainable, but when he emerged from his sarcophagus, his eyes did not open immediately. They fluttered, once, then again, like something inside them had forgotten which world it was in. He said nothing at first, filed no report, but when Sorth questioned him about the patrol route, Vareth replied with coordinates that didn't exist. He named roads that led nowhere, spoke of ruined bridges the satellite scans showed intact. When confronted, he blinked slowly and simply said, "I walked them last night. Dreams. Astartes do not dream." The biological restructuring of the brain, the suppression of REM cycles, the hypno-indoctrination, all of it burns sleep into a tool, not a sanctuary. Their minds do not drift. They lock. And yet, Vareth had wandered. Rayleigh reviewed the data. No warp flux. No psychic flooded. Vareth tested clean. His gene seed response remained stable. But when placed under mental observation, his speech patterns changed subtly. He used pronouns he'd never used before. We became I. The chapter became my people. His diction lost precision, not from trauma, from softness. Within 72 hours, 3 more Marines reported disturbances. Not nightmares, not hallucinations, memories. Brother Halgren recalled a courtyard beneath Twin Moon's Silex had only one. He described it in vivid detail. Cracked white stone shaped like imperial pteroglyphs. Vines forming a spiral down its center. A fountain that bled ink instead of water. He said he'd sat beside it. Not alone. With someone. A girl with black braids and gold-threaded robes. She never spoke. But she sang without opening her mouth. Brother Kurov dreamed of writing. Not reading, writing. He described a journal he had kept since youth. The sensation of a stylus in his hand. He could recall the names of his sisters. 3. None existed. His progenoid memory was perfect. No family survived his induction. But now, he could see them laughing, in a sunlit home, carved from blue stone, a world no archive recognized. They began to whisper among themselves, not in dissent, not in fear, in awe. Each dream unfolded not as fiction, but as remembrance, detailed, weighted, sequential. When asked to describe them, they didn't speculate, they recounted. Sarth ordered a full cognitive sweep. Vexos initiated bioscans, neural pattern mapping, sleep state monitoring. Results returned clean, uniform. No deviation outside of anomaly flag. Unauthorized dream activity detected, but no source, no signature, no presence of the warp. Just a lingering ... intention. Not invasion, Vexos said. Voice flat behind his helm. Impression. The dreams continued. They did not intensify. They personalized. Each Marine saw a different world, but all carried echoes of the same structure paths, names, scents. The smell of salt, the feel of paper, the sound of slow wind across stone. None of them had known these things in their current lives. Rayleigh's was the last to report, not because he resisted, but because he doubted. He'd trained himself for null space exposure. He had withstood Black Library resonance fields and survived Dream Construct interrogation drills. But even he began to feel the bleed, not in sleep, in silence. Moments between speech, between thought, a name rising in his throat that he'd never learned, a door shape he could sketch blind, a candle that never extinguished. It began to press into him, not hard, not cruel, just ... present. Sarth theorized the residue of lost consciousness embedded in material form, not souls, not spirits, intention fossilized in place. This world remembers being touched, he said, not by gods, by minds, and it wants to share that, Rayleigh answered, but not as warning. No, Sarth agreed, as legacy. They found further evidence in the old archives, buried beneath the chapel foundation, not protected, forgotten, thousands of slates, no power left, Vexos interfaced manually. The script was old Praemonitorum, root dialects, pictogrammatic, they translated slowly. The logs detailed ritual recollection exercises, communal dreaming, recorded not as mysticism, but science. Civilians had submitted themselves to mnemonic convergence rites. Memory used not as data but as sacrament. Experiences pooled, refined, redistributed. The mind turned communal, not hive mind.